All right, welcome to Killer Psychologist. I am so excited today. We have Alexandra Orton with us today, and she is the showrunner and producer for Out There Paranormal Activity. And I've been binge watching it. And I told my parents the other night, and my dad was so excited because he's all about UFOs. And he's he's so excited to watch the episodes. And also, um, my parents are into lizard people. So the first episode, I was very interested to see how you were going to portray um, people's beliefs and experiences, as they unfold. And everybody has different belief systems, right? But I love how um, you actually never use the word delusion or any point, or, because people can have strongly held beliefs or superstitions, and there's other factors at play, cultural factors, right? Their upbringing. And even for me growing up, I would I was raised to believe in demons or demon possession. And so there's a lot of other factors that can shape or influence what you believe. And so I just loved how each person you had got to share their experience and as it unfolded, and it was very interesting. So I would just love to know how you came about. I know there was a lot of thought process and detail to handpick these episodes, these stories. And I my one of my questions is, was there someone to help consult with, um to for or maybe a forensic psychologist or somebody to help with this storytelling aspect?
Yeah, well, thank you. That was a great intro and touched on a lot of the things that I think make the show so rich. I guess so. I'll give you sort of a three part. How it got started was the Duplass brothers and Josh Raffay, the director of Sasquatch, which was a really amazing doc series that came out in 2021 on Hulu. They made that series. It was about a journalist who had a memory of in the 90s working on a weed farm and overhearing that some men who worked there were killed by a Sasquatch. And it always stuck with him. And so then, in the 2000s, he decided to research it. And as he went down this rabbit hole and met this crazy, heard this outlandish tale with all of these unique characters, like federal drug agencies, drug dealers, all different types of people. He began to really question, like, who's the monster in this story? Is the monster Sasquatch, or is it a human, right? Is it us? And that was a big hit for Hulu. And I think the team felt like there was really fertile ground there. There was a lot more to explore because the monsters we believe in, the myths we believe in, tell us so much about ourselves, like you just said. Uh,
I love that. I love that. That is so true.
yeah.
Yes.
So from there, we all got together and we started trying to break out, okay, how many of these stories can we tell? And how many of them, we needed a true crime with some sort of supernatural or paranormal element, an unexplained mystery where a set of people become convinced that the explanation is grounded in the paranormal or the mythic, right? And then from there, I think what you said about your background and your dad's background is so true. The key to telling these stories, I think, both well and also responsibly, is that you can never look down on anybody you talk to. Everybody in the world, you may totally disagree with their beliefs or their actions, but everybody is trying the best they can to behave rationally with the data that they have. So that means that if you grow up with certain cultural beliefs, or, you're in a group, whether it's a UFO network or it's a church or it's a, immigrant population in a country with totally different values than your own, you're taking all these things you learned as you were raised and you're trying the best you can to live your life responsibly and to take care of your loved ones. That doesn't mean that me, coming from a totally different background, will totally understand why you're making some of the decisions you're making. And you might not understand the decisions I'm making, but we have to assume that everybody's trying their best to live wisely, right? Nobody's out there just doing random things for no reason at all. And so each episode, we had a whole bunch of people we talked to, experts behind the scenes, and some of them made it on camera. But with each of them, I mean, it was a very deep bench, just making sure that we could really understand where these people were coming from and meet them on their own turf.
I love that. And as a forensic psychologist, I talk to a lot of different people from varied backgrounds and that have different belief systems that are unusual. And one of the things I've learned in my role is to, um, never oppose someone's belief system. It's really not my job, right? Of whether it's true or not. I, as a I'm the fact finder or data finder in some of the types of evaluations I do. Um, but I find the work that I do so interesting to hear people's lived experiences and how they've come to this particular belief system. And I agree with what you're saying that people are just trying to do the best they can with the information they have. And that can be their experience. And your view can sometimes be very limited or even narrow, or, you're not exposed to uh, other different information. So even these people in these small towns and the small community that maybe they became really so deeply ingrained in that. And then it was interesting how some other people outside, law enforcement or other people with different experiences outside the town, were offering a different point of view, a completely different point of view. And that's what made it so interesting to follow the journeys um, but each person was in absolute belief that this is what happened. And so that not all of them can be right, right?
Yes, sorry, I have a cameo. A person who loves a cameo here. But I think, we tried really hard as filmmakers. We always wanted to contextualize. So, for example, an episode like The Poplick Goat Man, which is about a creature on the outskirts of Louisville, Kentucky, that is supposed to haunt this train trestle, a train railroad bridge, and lure people up there to see if they can see the goat man. And so what happens is a bunch of teens go up there, looking for a thrill, but the train track seems abandoned, but it is a very active railroad. And so there are actually many people who have really tragically died because they go up there looking for the goat man and a train comes and you cannot outrun it. If you are on that bridge and a train comes, you will die. And so on the one hand, we meet people in that episode who have first person testimony about meeting the goat man. And they're not faking it. Whatever their experience is, that is real emotion. That is real fear that you're hearing. At the same time, we have to contextualize. And in fact, that woman, Lexi, who has her goat man experience, she says as well, do not go up on the train tracks, because the reality is we don't want, a kid dying of a scary story is your worst nightmare. You would never want that to happen. And so you have to weigh, you don't have to tell people what to think, but you've always got to contextualize these rich myths or folklore or beliefs with, okay, well, what's the practical thing that's going to happen? What's the thing that's going to happen in the material world that could be so, a real horror story?
Yeah, I watched that episode, and Lexi is still deeply distressed and emotional about her experience and losing her friend, and then interviewing the engineer, right, who he's the one that drives the train. So there were many deaths. I can't remember the exact number. It was something like over 40 throughout the course of his
It's
career.
oh, accidents, yeah. So I don't
Accident.
they don't necessarily all they're casualties, so they don't necessarily all result in death. But yeah, I think he said he had
Hmm.
1 or 42 casualties in his career.
Right, and he doesn't even know the specifics because he didn't want to know. So he was, interviewed on that for that episode, and it was kinda interesting his, feedback on the train trestle of course, if you go up there and a train comes, you wouldn't have any way to escape. Um, and, curiosity, I was thinking of myself as a teen. I would have totally gone up there. And, I mean, it's so tragic, right? But we're just driven to follow, like, the mystery and, you know, and truly some of them being accidents, unintended consequences, right? And then there is the unknown when there are deaths of whether it was, intentional or not. And some of those things perhaps we cannot know.
Yeah, I think we try not to tell you what to think. Everybody's going to watch and have their own opinion of the mystery, right? And then there are some episodes where without revealing them, if people haven't seen the episodes, I don't want to spoil it. But there are some episodes where there are certain discoveries that we can make because each one of these is a completely new investigation. So it might be talking about an old mystery, but we put new resources into trying to understand what happened. And so in some cases, you get these major breaks where you'll probably most of us will have the same takeaway. But even if we can solve the real world crime, we never weigh in on does that mean that this belief or element of folklore or supernatural element doesn't exist or does exist. That's everybody's own opinion to draw.
Yeah, so I don't really watch episodes in order, and so I let my son pick out the first episode. I don't know why I do this all the time. Like, I'll just pick out the most interesting one to me. And so some reason we picked episode number 6, The Shape-Shifting Defense, which I was curious, like, I would like to shapeshift or, I'd like to know how this story goes. And it was very fascinating, but I love, like, the deep dive into just the cultural factors, of the Native American Indians and everyone's just the history. There's a lot of history there. And I was quite shocked at how the episode ended up. And I'm trying not to give away everything, but I will say in all the episodes, I was surprised. There was so much to learn along the way. And then in the end, to find out what actually happened, or I want to say so much, but, a person confessing to committing this crime. So, and how it plays out in a court of law. And it just seemed like in so many of the stories, there wasn't justice. And maybe that's why, like, the mystery continues, that this uncertainty, like this left open, like the case isn't closed, and it leaves people left with their thoughts trying to figure it out and put the pieces together of, like, what do you want to believe, right?
Yeah. I mean, that one is a very interesting episode. So I guess just to set it up for people who haven't seen it, it's basically about a woman who is Navajo, or Dene is the way that they typically identify themselves. And she is murdered in the 80s and brutally murdered. And her family, who is very, very close to her, they try really hard to get people to investigate thoroughly. But the town of Flagstaff, where she's found, has a history of not, and all of our towns are like this, has a history of not prioritizing Indigenous people like they do non-Indigenous people. And so the case kind of drags on. And then when someone comes in and confesses, the defense team comes up with an argument that he must be innocent because instead a Navajo skinwalker is responsible for the murder of this woman. And that one, I give all the credit in the world to the team. We have two amazing directors on that episode, Alexandra Lazarowicz and Ramona Emerson. Alexandra is Cree, Ramona is Dene. And we had Dene APs who helped us out, associate producers. And that one, I think, was just one of the most humbling learning experiences for the rest of us, because it really opened our eyes to not only Navajo history, but the ways in which mainstream media has so often taken their stories and then got them wrong. And I mean, that's when I think about all the time. And the hope is that you hear this tantalizing story and you think, oh, I got to tune in. And then when you leave the episode and you're done, you walk away with it with an understanding of, oh, these communities have a lot to tell us. And they are, they completely understand what they need to get better justice in their communities. There's this whole movement of missing and murdered Indigenous people. And people are trying to correct that. And they don't need us to have an opinion, really. They just need us to listen and help in the way that we can, right? And so that was something that I just couldn't have imagined I would be learning about when I started this job. And ending this job, it feels like one of the most profound things I experienced.
Yeah, that episode was deeply disturbing. Because there was no justice. And I, yeah. I have so many questions, about, so, the man that confessed never was, so the jury decided that he was not guilty, even though he confessed, and the whole, that was shocking. I felt that was shocking, but there's, but what a horrifying experience to live in a community where we're not even talking about a boogeyman. We're talking about this white man that allegedly murdered this woman and doesn't get convicted. And he, if it's true, then he gets away with murder, and then he leaves into the woods and apparently wasn't available in the future for interviews. So it's like, that is a real life nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Because he is found not guilty, we cannot say for sure. We can definitely have our opinions based on the evidence, it's very compelling evidence. But I think that no matter what we can say is this was a case where the Flagstaff community's willingness to misunderstand Navajo culture and practices and to view those people as second-class citizens, that is the thing that caused the miscarriage of justice. And one of the things that people talk to us about a lot when we were filming is they don't really think about it in terms of we need justice now, the way a lot of other people might talk about crimes, because for them it's like, this is a long pattern of these in particular women, but people of all genders, turning up missing or murdered. And you can't give those families back their loved one. You can't turn back the clock for them. So I don't know that there is restorative justice to give these people, even if you could, find new evidence, reopen a case. But what we can do is we can look at similar cases as they pop up, and we can do what we can to behave differently this time. And I think that there are a lot of community activists in Navajo Nation, and some of them are featured in the documentary, who have been pushing for decades, to make this a visible movement, and who have been trying to change the way that border towns interact with First Nations. And I think that they have had a lot of success. It's just there's a lot left to do, and we need to all pitch in.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And it's still something that is happening today in 2024. There's cases right now. In fact, one cold case that I'm helping a family with, but these missing women, they're not, the deaths aren't being investigated for one. And by the time they come to me or someone to relook at the cold case, um, you know, it's to go back and open up a cold case, right? And get someone to relook at the autopsy or whatever, all the evidence. It gets very complicated, and it's interestingly enough, there's a new bill that just passed, SB 9 or SBS 989, and it's about, this is cases, domestic violence cases where there's a suspicious death. There's now going to be funding to take a look at into the investigation of whether it was homicide, right? That just passed, like, I think last week, but those are markers that I want to see more of. So for people, right, in these suspicious deaths, they need to be investigated. And it's just shocking. I found that such a miscarriage of justice, like you said. And it makes me think of my role as a forensic psychologist. I actually interview these people, or I review tapes of confessions to determine their validity or things. And they played part of his confession on that episode, which was quite telling. And many people do want to tell the truth about what they've done. And it seemed like he was sharing that for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, I can't get into his brain, and I didn't get to meet him, but there are transcripts of, oh gosh, at least 3, but maybe versions of 5 different times he was interviewed and told his story. And we say in the documentary, he doesn't give the exact same story each time, And I think that personally, when he talks about how he was a victim of abuse in his past, I believe that. And I think when he's talking about how he has mental health issues, I believe that too. That as a layperson listening to the tape, that I have no reason to doubt that. But the interviews are pretty extensive. Their transcripts all survive. And then we found several of the audio tapes as well, which was pretty amazing. Our team just did a really phenomenal job. But, I mean, you could also say it's a miscarriage of justice that people who have severe mental illness fall through the cracks. And some of them become violent, and then other people are terribly victimized as a result. But these are really rich issues. And I don't know, we're lucky to have people with your job and other jobs to be looking into them.
Well, I love the storytelling piece that came through. So it's true crime meets paranormal, but there was actually it felt like this documentary, right, as it's unfolding. So if there was just a lot of details. So I respect all the research that went into that. I can't even imagine all the work that went into each episode, but I thought it was very well done. And I loved how you honored, the victims. And also, sometimes sometimes something I see, as a psychologist with people that have unusual belief systems, um, like they're struggling with mental health too, and it can be very difficult for them to share their story. And you could see that some people were very distressed, and it takes a lot for them to come out and, be visible or be seen in the public eye or potentially be, ridiculed, right? Or questioned or whatever. But I love that there was no disparaging in the storyline. Like everyone got to say what they believed, and it left it up for you in the end. You've heard everyone's experiences and, what do you think? So I like that, you know.
And there are
I
all
think-
different types of reasons for believing in things, right? Like we tried hard to make sure that each episode touched on different reasons. So sometimes people are believing in a supernatural explanation because they've lost a loved one and that's part of their grief process. In Interstellar Voyager, does Granger Taylor disappear on a spaceship, or is the story more normal but sadder, right? You want him to be on a spaceship. In the Smoky Mountain Nightmare, a little boy goes missing, and I think that a lot of the people who tell tales about what could have happened to him, it springs from just not being able to fathom losing a little kid, which is the worst thing you can imagine. And then I think that, the alien hunters, for people like your dad, those guys, that's a community. Those people, so much of belief, people move toward these beliefs because of loneliness, but they also move toward them because of community. So you can end up feeling isolated online and get sucked into lizard people, or you can go out in the woods looking around for a Tennessee wild man, or take your telescope out every night and look for UFOs and believe that you could make a discovery that changes the world, that proves that there's room for more wonder. And I think that's really interesting.
It is very interesting. I ask my parents, I'm like, how do you know I'm not a lizard person? Like,
What do they say?
like one day I could just show up and like unzip myself, like, what if I told you I was right now? Like, what are you going to do? I like to play with them a little bit, but yeah, it was incredible storytelling. So I love the episodes. I binge watched it. I'm excited to, talk about it and share it with others. I'm excited to follow your journey, and I will like, what's next?
Well, hopefully enough people watch and like it that we get to make more of them, because there are definitely a lot of other stories out there we'd love to tell. But we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Okay, well, I'm rooting for you. And, if you ever need like a, forensic psychologist to like, you know, psychological debriefing for people afterwards, or just like a perspective, um, yeah, I would love to help out.
All right. Cool. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I'm rooting for more episodes, and I really appreciate you coming on today. It was exciting to meet you, and I'm now a fan of your work. So I will be excited to follow your journey and see what episodes are next.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here.
Thanks for listening. For episode details and merch, check out killerpsychologistpodcast.com. And for forensic services, you can book online at psychologydr.com. That's psychologydoctor.com.